This episode is a special encore presentation of Work Trends. Welcome to the Work Trends podcast, brought to you by Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan M. Bureau. Every week, I interview smart people reimagining the world of work. Be sure to stay current with all of our interesting podcasts by visiting our page at Talent Culture Work Trends on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And of course, you can listen at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome everyone to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast. Today, we are here to talk about courage. Not Courage the Cowardly Dog. And no, we're not even talking about superhero courage. Just the courage to speak up and innovate for yourself in your workplace or wherever you work. According to McKinsey, 80% of executives think their current business model is at risk of disruption in the near future. And 84% of people said innovation is important to their current growth strategy. Similarly, an innovation survey from Accenture reported that 84% of executives considered their future success to be very or extremely dependent on innovation. The problem is that innovation has a sticky reputation at work, as in it's easy to stick to what you already know, especially if you're not in a leadership position. In order to innovate, you need a culture that inspires it. I'm joined today by Karen Hurt, an expert in human-centered leadership with an innovative spin. But first, here's some backdrop on Karen. Karen Hurt helps human-centered leaders resolve workplace ambiguity so they can drive innovation, productivity, and revenue without burning out employees. Can you imagine that? After 2 decades as a Verizon executive, Karen and her husband David founded Let's Grow Leaders, a training firm focused on human-centered leadership development for those determined to get breakthrough results without losing their humanity. Leaders, they found, were hungry for practical tools and leadership development that sticks. Since 2013, Karen and David have helped grow over 10,000 leaders in 14 countries with their live leadership development programs, keynotes, blogs, videos, and books. She's an award-winning author of 4 books. She's the host of the popular LinkedIn show Asking for a Friend, and was recently named by Inc. magazine as a top 100 great leadership speaker. They also provide clean water to the people of Cambodia through their Winning Wells philanthropic initiative. So welcome, Karen.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Megan.
Of course. Well, tell us, what inspired your research on psychological safety and innovation?
You know, it was really interesting, Megan. We were working with leaders across a variety of industries all around the world, and we were having conversations at the senior most levels of these organizations, and we were hearing things like, why don't more people share their ideas? Why don't people speak up? Why am I the only one who stumbles upon this best practice? Why aren't people talking to one another? And then we would be doing training at the supervisor level of these same organizations, and we would hear things like, no one wants my ideas. The last time I spoke up, I got in trouble. Nothing ever happens anyway, so why bother? And we thought, are you working for the same company? Employees have ideas. Leaders really do want to hear them, and yet somehow there was this disconnect. So we partnered with the University of North Colorado on an extensive quantitative and qualitative research study to understand when employees were holding back ideas, what kind of ideas were they holding back, and what was preventing them from speaking up.
Interesting, because I tell you, there is a huge disconnect.
Yeah. One of the things that we found, so the ideas that people were holding back were not trivial. It wasn't like, oh, kombucha in the break room or virtual Taco Tuesdays. They said they were withholding ideas to improve the customer experience, the employee experience, or productivity in a process. And then when we dug underneath and found out why they were holding back these ideas, 50% said nothing will ever happen anyway. 49% said they weren't regularly asked for their ideas. 67% said my manager operates around the notion of this is the way we've always done it. 40% said they lack the confidence to share. And this one was really the most surprising. 56% said they don't share ideas because they're afraid they won't get the credit.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting as we've been sharing that statistic, and if we're in front of a live audience, you could just hear the wave go over the audience, and they're like, that happened to me too. Somebody stole my idea. It's just sad.
Are we very selfish, us humans? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
I don't think most of the time people are doing this on purpose. I think that's the interesting thing. A while back, I was teaching in an MBA program, and I was teaching a class about difficult people at work. And you had to work on a project to work on this difficult person. Almost every person chose their boss. And the most popular topic was my boss was stealing credit. And as we really worked through that, a lot of times I think people are just moving fast and they forget to go back and say thank you or acknowledge someone.
What did you find most surprising? I mean, I know there's a lot of surprises here.
I think the most surprising part came from the qualitative aspect of the research once we got through the quantitative portion, where we would say, well, what is the most courageous act at work you've ever had at work? Or what is, or why aren't you speaking up? And a lot of times people would tell us these stories, and they would be pretty dramatic stories. And they said, so I'm never doing that again. I'm never speaking up again. And then we would say, well, how long ago was that experience? A lot of the time, it was a very long time ago, like a decade ago. And then we would say, well, was it at this organization? No, it was at another company, but I'm never doing that again. And, that really resonates with Dr. Amy Edmondson, who, is really the pioneer of psychological safety. And she wrote the foreword to our book. She says people are way more likely to hold on to a negative experience than a positive one.
Oh, gosh, for sure. I mean, I see that playing out in my weekly life here in business.
Yeah. And so, which means even if you are a truly human-centered leader doing all the right things, there's a statistical likelihood that there's still someone on your team who lacks psychological safety because of a past experience.
And who knows who's going to be on the other side of that frustration. You talk about 7 steps to building a courageous culture. What are they?
So it starts with navigating the narrative, and that is really getting very clear about how you feel about speaking up at work. Because if your team is watching you and you say, yeah, I really want to hear your ideas, and no idea is a bad idea, and bring things forward, but they're looking at you and you're playing a lot of political games, you're not sharing ideas with peers, you're not bringing up and advocating for people's ideas to your manager, they're watching that, and leaders go first. And so that's the first step. And then it's creating clarity. And that's clarity around 2 things. 1, clarity that you really do want people's ideas. And you can do that in a number of ways, all the way from starting at the way you're onboarding people to the way you're recognizing people to just simply going out and asking. So clarity, and then clarity about what a good idea would accomplish. And this is really important because we tested the tools that we've included in Courageous Cultures, and we did it in a couple of ways. One was simply, hey, bring us any ideas to improve the business. We also then said, bring us ideas about this particular topic, this strategic initiative. And when we were more specific and we created more clarity about the kinds of ideas we needed, that's when the real game-changing ideas came through. So that's clarity. So navigate the narrative, create clarity, cultivate curiosity, which is where you proactively go out and ask people for their ideas. And we include a variety of tools on how to do that. And then the 4th step is really, really important, which is responding with regard. Because one of the things that we found, 50% said nothing will ever happen. Sometimes things were happening. People just didn't know. The loop was not closed. And so, what are you doing? How are you responding with an idea, even if it's an idea you can't use? So we talk about responding with gratitude, thanking people for their ideas, information, telling them what's going to happen next or not happen next and why, and then an invitation to continue to contribute ideas. So those are the 4 that everyone can use, whether you are a frontline supervisor, whether you're the CHRO. Those 4 steps are important to everyone. And then the next 3 steps are more if you are in a position to create a cultural change. And so we talk about practicing the principle about how do you tap into the most important part of a best practice, but pause there, understand the principle behind that before you go to scale it. In case you've ever had a situation where someone says, this best practice, now everyone has to do it. And, it might have worked in New York City, but it's not going to work in Roanoke, Virginia. So that's the practice, the principle. And we have a lot of detail around that in the book. And then galvanizing the genius. How do you get everyone in your organization thinking this way? And then finally, building an infrastructure for courage, which is so important for HR folks listening, where, how do you be very clear in your onboarding and your performance management processes and the way you're doing rewards and recognition, who you promote in your $9 processes, that kind of thing.
I know for a fact that we have a lot of employees in our community listening right now, saying maybe to themselves, I wish we had a courageous culture, but we don't. And I'm not the CEO or I'm not the leader. What can I do? How can each of us start doing this today?
Yeah, so we have a very simple technique that we have been teaching in our Courageous Cultures programs, which employees who are not managers tell us this is a very good way to position their ideas and are having a lot of success with it being heard. So you go to your manager and you say, hey, I've got an idea to improve the business. Would you be interested in hearing that? Most managers, unless they're a psychopath, are going to say, yes, I'd love to hear that, right? And so then you go use our idea model. This is why this idea is interesting, meaning this is why this idea is strategically aligned with where I know we're headed, what we're working on right now. D, doable. This is why this idea is something we could actually pull off. And I think that's particularly important right now because everyone is focused on the next 6 months because there's so much uncertainty. Then E, engaging. Here's who else I've talked to who also thinks this is a good idea. Hey, I checked with my HR business partner. I checked with finance. I checked with my peer in another department. Whoever the relevant stakeholder is.
That's really interesting. I mean, how are we all positioning ourselves so ideas are heard? That's another question.
Yeah. So, one of the things, I shared that 49% said they're not regularly asked for their ideas. And so whether you are a manager, whether you're an employee, one of the things you can also do is when you're thinking about a topic or a challenge that you have, just simply ask one another courageous questions. And we teach this in our programs as well, where you say, okay, a courageous question differs from a general, how do we do this better question in a couple of ways. It's specific and it's vulnerable. It's assuming that improvement is possible. So, for example, I'm assuming we must have something that's ticking off our customers, and I'm just asking for one. And, when you can begin to teach people to ask those questions, or what is one thing about this project that's really concerning you that might cause it to fail? These are courageous questions that as a team, if you begin to ask one another, it can surface some of the bigger challenges.
It's all about just putting some space and time into your culture, into yourself to make it happen. And again, we're all running around in different directions half the time. We're not being mindful maybe about how we can be better and just stopping.
Absolutely. And, I think sometimes we are moving so fast, we don't think we have time to stop and do that. But if you don't do that, you can waste a lot of time. I'll give you an example. We were working at an executive offsite, and who was in the room were the presidents of the 5 brands of this company and the people who were in immediate succession planning to potentially take on one of those roles. So a fairly senior group. And we were working on this strategic project plan that was going to need collaboration across all the different brands. And do you ever get that feeling people are just not having the conversation that they really need to be having? So I'm thinking we need psychological safety. We need to really figure out what's going on here. So I put an index card in front of everybody's seat and I said, on the front of the card, write an H, and right on the back of the card, write an F. And where there's an H, put your biggest hopes for this project. On the back, write your biggest fears. And then I collected the cards. Well, all the hopes were all the things you would expect to be in the room. It was all what was on the white easel sheets around the room. This is why we were there. Everybody understood why we're there. But what was fascinating was the fears. I do not think anyone else in this room is taking this as seriously as I am. I'm not sure my peers are really going to execute. I have a feeling this is a waste of time because I don't think everyone else has bought in to implement this. The fears were all exactly the same. Now, if we had the next 2 days working on that project and did not know that that was a problem, that would have been an issue. So of course we had to stop and have that conversation and ensure that everyone was really on the same page. And then we had a productive meeting.
Again, stopping, thinking, and being thoughtful about next steps. Well, tell me, there is a lot changing. I mean, finally, how do you foresee the role of leadership evolving over the next, say, 5-10 years?
You know, it's interesting. I think we've already seen some acceleration in this as we're watching patterns of the leaders that are being most successful during this really turbulent and stressful time. It's the leaders that are really showing up a little vulnerable themselves, willing to say, I don't have all the answers, but I believe in this team. Let's figure this out together. And as we think about where, technology is headed and AI and, the simple work can be automated. But there is a type of work that only humans can do and humans do best, which is to show up with empathy for customers, for employees, to think about things from a human-centered point of view, and to generate these ideas and connect the dots and put things together. And so that's why I think it's so critical at this juncture for leaders to be not only asking for ideas and responding with regard to those ideas, but teaching people how to think critically and to involve them in the process.
Good stuff, Karen. I want to thank you so much for stopping by and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Megan.
Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Just a reminder that you can hear all the Work Trends podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and on the podcast page at talentculture.com. Be sure to subscribe so you can listen on the go and stay up to date on all the latest news you want to hear. I look forward to catching up with you next time. I hope today's information made you wiser, happier, more informed, and most importantly, thinking of how you can use it to improve the quality of your life.